You never really think a single moment can change your life until you're standing in the middle of one with no idea what it means yet. That's what happened to me on a bitter Thursday evening in early December when the cold crept into my bones like it had every intention of staying. I just missed the last bus home after a 12-hour shift at Mel's Diner, where tips were low and expectations somehow even lower. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are right now in the comments. You're about to hear the kind of story that stays with you. It was one of those days where your feet ache before you even clock in, where every smile you force at a customer feels like a betrayal of your own exhaustion. And when that day finally ends, there's no warm car waiting, no soft bed close by, just a long walk to the station and the hope that public transit will be kind. I remember the sky was a kind of bruised gray blue, that color it turns right before it gives up on pretending it's day anymore. My apron still smelled like grease and syrup, and the soles of my shoes felt like they'd been sanded down to paper. I walked into the station holding my $10 bill like it was an heirloom. It was all I had left until payday. Rent was due in 5 days. The fridge held a half-empty jar of peanut butter and a single wilting apple, and I had $10. The benches in the waiting area were mostly empty. A man snored in the far corner, his coat wrapped around him like a cocoon. A couple sat silently near the vending machine, their hands barely touching, and me, I sat on the edge of a cold metal bench, $10 in my coat pocket, praying the train wouldn't be delayed. I remember shivering and wondering how I'd ended up here, 29 years old and barely scraping by. My mother used to say hard times build character, but I was starting to feel like I had enough character for 10 lifetimes. I'd worked double shifts for months and still couldn't breathe without counting pennies. That $10, it wasn't a luxury. It was bus fare, a cheap dinner, maybe a bottle of shampoo if I stretched it. It was dignity, control, something that said, I still have some power left. And that's when he walked in. He wasn't loud, didn't stumble or shout, just walked like he belonged, like he'd done this 100 times before. Mid-40s. Maybe older, dark coat frayed at the edges, face weathered by something more than time. He had the kind of eyes that see you before you even notice them. Eyes that make you feel like you're suddenly under a microscope. I remember trying not to look at him, even though something in my gut told me to. There was a quiet confidence in the way he scanned the room, like he was looking for someone. Like he knew he'd find them, and then those eyes landed on me. He didn't smile, didn't approach fast, just walked over and stopped a few feet away. Excuse me, he said, voice low but clear. I hate to ask, but I need $10 to catch the next train. I lost my wallet earlier today. I blinked at him, once, twice. My brain stalled hard. $10, not 5, not 3, 10. I opened my mouth to say no. My lips even formed the N, but the word never came out. Instead, I stared at him. His shoes were worn but polished, his coat old but not dirty, and his hands were clean, fingernails trimmed, no shaking, no pleading. He looked me in the eye like we were equals. Please, he added almost like an afterthought, just trying to get home. Every rational part of me screamed no. Screamed that this was a con, that no one just walks into a station and asks a stranger for exactly $10 without some kind of game behind it. I'd seen the tricks, I'd been guilted before, but this wasn't a trick, or at least it didn't feel like one. It felt like something else. I reached into my pocket and felt the crumpled $10 bill like it might burn me. For a moment, I thought about what I could still do with it. A hot meal, a bus ride, a band-aid for a bleeding week. And then I gave it to him. He didn't smile, didn't say thank you. He just nodded, barely, and walked toward the platform. I sat frozen, watching his back disappear into the shadowy tunnel entrance. My hand still hovered where the money had been. Gone. just like that. I didn't even know his name. A wave of nausea hit me. Not just the hunger or the fatigue, but something deeper. Shame, like I'd done something incredibly foolish. My heart pounded as I stood and walked slowly toward the exit, my body heavier with every step. Why had I done that? I passed the flickering fluorescent lights, the chipped vending machines, the scuffed tile floors, all buzzing with the quiet ache of missed chances and tired souls. Outside, the wind bit at my face, cruel and unforgiving. I walked the 5 miles, home numb, feet blistered, stomach aching, no money, no plan, just a story that didn't make any sense. He hadn't even said thank you. But something told me this wasn't over. Something told me that man, whoever he was, had just shifted. Something in my life, and I had no idea where it would lead. The next morning felt like waking up underwater. My body was leaden with exhaustion, every muscle sore from the long walk home. My stomach growled in protest, but I ignored it. There was nothing left to eat except a couple stale crackers and half a cup of orange juice that had definitely turned. I sat on the edge of my sagging mattress in that one-bedroom apartment that never quite warmed up in winter, trying to piece together the night before. The man at the station, his voice still echoed in my mind, calm, unshaken, not desperate, not panicked, just sure, like he knew I'd say yes, like he knew something I didn't. I didn't tell anyone at work what I'd done, not that anyone would have cared. Mel's Diner wasn't the kind of place where people asked about your life unless it involved shift swapping or gossip. I wore my tired face like armor and kept my mouth shut, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. Why me? That was the question I couldn't shake. Out of all the people in that station, why had he asked me? There'd been a couple, a security guard, 2 men half asleep on a bench. But he chose me like he'd seen something, and I gave him everything I had left just like that. My co-workers wouldn't understand. They'd laugh, maybe even lecture me. Sandra would say I had sucker written on my forehead. Ruben would crack a joke about running into the same guy and asking for his cut. And maybe I deserved all that, because now I was down to nothing. That $10 was supposed to carry me to payday. It had been a lifeline, fragile but real. And now it was gone. The rest of that week blurred into a pattern of tightening belts and clenched teeth. I rationed what little food I had, drank water until I felt full, and borrowed a roll of toilet paper from the diner's supply closet. Quietly, guiltily, but with enough desperation to make the guilt an afterthought. When Friday came, and I opened my empty wallet, reality hit hard. I stood at my cracked kitchen counter, staring at the overdue rent notice pinned to the fridge with a broken magnet. It looked brighter now, like it was taunting me. The fluorescent yellow of final warning. 3 days left. 3 days to figure out how to stretch nothing into something. I'd always been resourceful. Pride didn't feed you, and I'd learned that lesson more than once. But even still, this felt like rock bottom, inching closer every hour. And yet, through all of it, I kept thinking about him. The way he looked at me, the way he didn't flinch when I hesitated, the way he walked away like the moment hadn't been unusual at all. No gratitude, no story, just silence. I played it over in my head again and again, trying to decode something I might have missed. A twitch of his hand, a glimmer in his eye. Was there a test I didn't know I was taking? Had I failed it? Passed it? That? A night, I dreamed I was back at the train station, but this time I was the one asking for money, and every face turned away. The man stood in the same spot I'd first seen him, only now he wore a suit and carried a briefcase. He looked at me like I was invisible. I woke up drenched in sweat. On Saturday, things got worse. The lights flickered in the bathroom. The heater groaned and sputtered, barely pushing out air. And at work, tips were non-existent. People were short-tempered, impatient. One man left me a dime and a piece of gum. I smiled and thanked him anyway. What else could I do? That night, I had to choose between buying a bus token or getting a slice of pizza. I chose the walk again. 5 miles in the cold, my breath fogging in the air, shoes rubbing fresh blisters into my heels. My feet hurt so badly, I thought I might cry. But I didn't. I kept walking, step by step, alone, and still I thought of him. By Sunday, I began to hate myself for giving the money away. Not because of the consequences, I could survive that. No, what really tore at me was the possibility that I'd been played, that maybe he wasn't lost or honest or even struggling. Maybe he was just a manipulator who saw a tired woman on a bench and took advantage. That thought lodged in my chest, like a splinter. Because if that was true, what did it say about me? What did it say about how I saw people, about my judgment, my instincts? I told myself to forget it, to let it go, to move on. But you can't move on from something that feels unfinished. You can't pretend a decision didn't matter when it keeps echoing in every corner of your life. On Monday morning, with $2 and change in my coat pocket, I took the long route to work just to avoid passing the station. I didn't want to see it, didn't want the memories crashing down again. I needed to focus. I needed to survive. But even as I walked a block out of my way, I still looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. He wasn't. Of course he wasn't. People don't come back like that, not in real life. And yet, every now and then, when the wind picked up and the world went quiet, I could still hear his voice. Just trying to get home. What did that mean? What kind of home did he mean? Something told me I hadn't seen the last of him, but I had no idea. How right I was. The 5th day hit differently. I'd gotten used to the hunger pangs, the anxious checking of my bank app that always confirmed what I already knew. $0. I'd even made peace with my aching feet and the walk to work. But the shame, that was harder to carry. It clung to me like a second skin, heavy and bitter. Every time I reached into my coat pocket and felt the absence of that $10 bill, it whispered, "You were stupid." I didn't even have to tell anyone what I'd done for that voice to grow louder. It was mine, after all, my own inner jury, delivering its verdict again and again. Guilty of bad judgment, guilty of foolish optimism, guilty of trusting the wrong person. I kept thinking if he'd at least said thank you, maybe it wouldn't sting so much. But no. He took the money, walked away, and didn't even look back. The walk home, that night was colder than usual, and my coat barely held in the warmth. I tucked my hands into my sleeves and stared at the pavement, trying not to cry. Crying wasted energy I couldn't afford to spend, but it built inside me like steam behind a sealed valve. And when I got back to my apartment, when I saw the second, larger, final rent notice plastered on my door, I snapped. I ripped the paper off, crumpled it in my hands and threw it against the wall. Then I slid down to the floor and let myself unravel. I cried, I screamed, not loud, just enough for my chest to hurt. I curled into myself on the floor like a kid and let the silence wrap around me. There was no one to call, no safety net. My parents were long gone, and the handful of people I might have leaned on were barely keeping their own heads above water. I'd always prided myself on being self-sufficient, tough as nails, as my mother used to say. But there, in that dim apartment, I was nothing but a woman who had made a choice she couldn't undo. And for what? A stranger who didn't even say thank you. I barely slept, and when I did, I had dreams that twisted everything sideways, strange versions of that moment at the station. In one, he took the money and laughed. In another, he handed it back with blood on his hands. But in the worst one, he turned into me, sitting alone, desperate, while someone else walked away. The next morning, I didn't bother putting on makeup. What was the point? My reflection looked tired, older, not just from the sleepless nights, but from something deeper, like part of me had aged faster in just 5 days. I went to work, barely speaking. I cleared tables and poured coffee and smiled when necessary, but I moved like a ghost. Everything felt distant, like I was watching my life through thick glass. One of the regulars left a tip in change, $1.83 in dimes and pennies. I swept it into my apron and told myself it was something. By the end of my shift, the manager asked if I was okay. I lied, of course. I said I was just tired. He didn't press. I think he knew. When I got home that night, the lights flickered once, then died. Just like that. The heater groaned, coughed, and shut off too. I sat in the dark, wrapped in 3 blankets, listening to the silence press in. That was when I reached the lowest point. And that's when the first whisper of something strange arrived. Because just after midnight, I heard something at the door. It was faint, a shuffle, maybe a thud. At first, I thought it was the neighbors or a rat in the hall. But then it came again, more deliberate this time. I got up, heart pounding, and opened the door a crack. There was no one there, just an envelope, no name, no writing on the outside. Just a plain white envelope lying on the welcome mat, catching the faint blue glow of the emergency light from the hallway. My first thought was, this is a mistake, wrong apartment, maybe a flyer or a scam, but something about the way it was, placed, neat, intentional, made me bend down and pick it up. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a crisp $100 bill, and a train ticket. My fingers shook as I unfolded the paper. 4 words. "You look like hope," I read. It again and again. It wasn't signed. There was no explanation. Just that one sentence, that single bill, and a train ticket for the 6:40 a.m. northbound the next day. I stared at it all for what felt like an hour. $100. That was food, electricity, bus fare for a week, and the ticket. Where did it even go? I checked the stub. It wasn't to anywhere familiar. A small town upstate I'd never heard of. Why there? Why me? Was this a trick, a joke? I thought of the man again, his calm voice, the look in his eyes. Could he have come back? Could this be from him? The $10 I gave him? This was more than repayment. It was something else. An invitation. You looked like hope. Those words didn't make sense. Not in the life I was living. Not in the shell I'd become over the last week. And yet, they lit a small fire in me. Just enough to feel something warm beneath all that numbness. I held the ticket in my hands like it might vanish. I had work the next day. Bills, responsibilities, a job I couldn't afford to lose. But I also had nothing left to give that version of myself, that tired, broke, worn-down girl sitting in the dark. So maybe it was time I gave something to someone else, even if that someone was me. I didn't sleep at all. I sat there in the dark, that envelope resting on my lap, the folded bill still pinched between my fingers like I was afraid it might disappear. The heater never came back on. The power stayed out. But for once, I wasn't thinking about being cold. My mind was racing through every possibility, every angle. Who would leave that money? Why? And how would they even know where I lived? It had to be him. It had to be. I tried to recall if I ever said my name, mentioned the diner, anything that could have led him back to me, but I hadn't. I was sure of it. The only thing I gave him, other than that crumpled bill, was a moment. A single moment. You looked like hope. The phrase kept looping in my head like a song I didn't know the words to. It sounded like a compliment, but also like a mirror. I didn't feel like hope. I hadn't in a long time. And yet somehow, someone saw something in me I'd forgotten was even there. The train ticket felt heavier than it should have. A simple slip of paper, but in it was a question I'd never asked myself seriously before. What if you just left? Not ran away, not gave up, but chose something else, something unknown. By 5:15 a.m., I had made up my mind. I packed what little I had in a worn canvas bag, Just essentials. My ID, a sweater, toothbrush, the photo of my mom and me when I was 10 standing in front of the first apartment we ever had that didn't have roaches. I put on my thickest socks and my most reliable shoes, wrapped myself in my coat, and looked around the apartment one last time. No tears, no sentiment, just a quiet goodbye. The streets were still half asleep when I stepped out, the city yawning its first breath of morning light. My breath fogged in the air as I walked the familiar stretch toward the station. Only this time, I wasn't dragging myself toward a shift that drained me. I was chasing something I didn't have a name for yet. The station was nearly empty, just a few early commuters, the usual maintenance guy buffing the floor like it mattered. I held the train ticket tight in my hand, afraid that if I dropped it, it would dissolve like a dream. Platform 4. That's what it said. I found it easily. The 640 was already waiting, humming low like a secret. I stepped into the car and found a seat by the window. The vinyl was cold beneath my thighs, the lights overhead flickering a little too brightly. I clutched the canvas bag against my chest and stared out the window, watching the city blur into a soft gray. I half expected someone to tap my shoulder and tell me I didn't belong there, that I couldn't ride without a story, without a destination that made sense. But no one did. No conductor asked me anything. No passengers glanced my way. The train lurched to life and the city began to roll away behind me. The ride was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. Each mile we traveled, I felt a little lighter. Like every station we passed, stripped away one layer of fear, one burden I'd carried too long. The morning sun cracked through the clouds and poured gold across the empty fields. Trees swayed like they were waving hello. I had no idea where I was going. The town on the ticket, Halebridge, meant nothing to me. I'd never heard of it. Google had told me it was small, rural, the kind of place where people probably still left their doors unlocked. That scared me, and excited me too. The train pulled in just past 8. Halebridge Station was barely more than a shelter with a bench, no loudspeakers, no neon signs, just wood, steel, and the crisp smell of morning pine. I stepped onto the platform with my bag and looked around, half expecting to see him standing there. But there was no one. No man in a coat. No stranger. With knowing eyes, just a town yawning open in front of me. I walked into it slowly, each step louder in the quiet. The streets were clean, birds chirped from telephone lines. A bakery across the street had its door open, and the smell of warm bread curled into the air like an invitation. I paused. I hadn't eaten in almost a day. With shaking fingers, I pulled the $100 bill from my coat pocket and stepped inside. The woman behind the counter smiled, really smiled, like it meant something. "Morning, hun. You just off the train?" I nodded. "Yeah. Passing through or staying a while?" I hesitated. "I don't know yet." She didn't push, just handed me a cinnamon roll so fresh it nearly melted through the paper sleeve. "First one's on the house." I blinked. "Wait, really?" She winked. "You look like someone who needs something sweet." I sat by the window and ate slowly, savoring every bite like it might vanish. The sugar, the butter, the warmth, it felt like medicine. That was when I saw it. Across the street, a man stood by the old fountain in the town square. Not the man, but close. He was dressed nicer than the locals. Suit, pressed coat, leather, shoes that didn't belong on cobbled sidewalks. And he was watching me, not in a creepy way, just patiently, like he'd been waiting. I froze, cinnamon roll halfway to my mouth. He gave a small nod, then turned and started walking. Something inside me shifted. I wrapped the roll in its sleeve, grabbed my bag, and followed. I didn't run, didn't call out, just moved instinctually, like I knew the steps even though I'd never danced this dance before. He led me down a side street, quiet and tree-lined, past a bookstore, a little park, a row of houses with porch swings. Then he stopped in front of a tall, grey stone building with ivy climbing its sides. He turned, and that's when I realized it was him, cleaner shaven now, better dressed, but the eyes exactly the same. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. I couldn't speak. "I owe you more than money," he added, "but we'll start there." And then he held out a key. My heart pounded as I reached for it. "What is this?" "A beginning," he said. "If you want it." I didn't take the key right away. My fingers hovered near it, heart pounding so hard I could feel the beat in my ears. The metal glinted. In the morning light, small and ordinary looking, but it felt like it weighed as much as a decision. I looked at his hand, at the key, then up into his face. "You left the envelope," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Yes." "And the note, and the money, the train ticket." "Yes," he said again quietly. I searched his expression for answers, but he gave me nothing more than a calm, steady look. There was something unsettling about his stillness, like he knew how this would go before I ever boarded that train. "I don't understand," I said. "Why?" A pause. "You gave when you had nothing," he said. "You didn't ask for anything back, not even thanks." I shook my head, frustration flickering in my chest. "It was just $10. You looked like you needed it, and you looked like you didn't have it to give," he replied gently. "But you gave it anyway." I didn't know what to say to that. He gestured to the building behind him. "I'd like to show you something if you want." Still, he made no move to convince me. No coaxing, no pushing, just the key and the invitation. I took a breath and reached out. The key was cool in my palm, smooth and solid. He turned and walked up the steps, unlocking the door with another key of his own. I followed, half hoping this wasn't the moment everything turned into some twisted joke. Inside was nothing like I expected. The building had been a library once, maybe. High ceilings, wooden beams, tall windows that let the light pour in like liquid gold. The shelves were mostly empty, but not abandoned. There were boxes stacked neatly, furniture half arranged, as though someone had just started moving in or rebuilding. He motioned me through a doorway into what looked like a side office. Inside was a simple desk, a chair, and a wall covered in photographs. Black and white images, color prints, faces young and old. "These are all people I've met," he said, stepping beside me. "What kind of people?" "People who helped me," he said. "Or needed help, or both." I looked at the photos, scanning the faces. One in particular caught my eye. A woman in a yellow raincoat, standing beside a bike, beaming at the camera like she'd just won the lottery. "What is this place?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked over to the desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. Inside was a plan, pages and pages of blueprints, checklists, names. At the top of the first sheet, the Hale Bridge Initiative. "What is this?" I asked again, softer this time. "A project," he said. "Something I've been building quietly, carefully. It started when I got my life back, when someone gave me a second chance I didn't deserve." "And you want me to, what? Help with it?" "I want you to lead it," he said. The words hit me like a wave. I laughed, sharp, startled. "Me? I don't know anything about running a program. I'm a waitress. I was broke 5 days ago. I can't even keep my lights on." He smiled. "That's why you're perfect." My mouth opened, then closed again. I couldn't even begin to make sense of what was happening. He continued, his voice low and steady. "I've watched people with degrees and money and polished speeches try to build something real, but they always build for people, not with them. You understand what it means to need, to give when it hurts. That's the kind of heart this needs." I looked down at the folder in my hands. My fingers trembled. "I'm not special," I whispered. "You don't have to be," he said. "You just have to care." Silence fell between us. I stared at the plans, at the dreams someone had committed to paper, a vision for a community center, job training, free meals, counseling, a garden, a safe place for people who had none. It felt impossible. It felt right. I thought back to 5 days ago, standing in that station, $10 to my name, handing it over without thinking. Not because I had anything to spare, but because I couldn't not do it. "You're really a millionaire?" I asked suddenly. He chuckled, nodding. "Technically, but that doesn't matter. Money's just a tool. It's what you build with it that counts." I stared at him, still not sure if I should believe it, still waiting for the punchline. But there was none. Just a man who had once been lost, offering me a lifeline I hadn't even known I needed. "I'll pay you a full salary," he added, "living wage, more than what you made at the diner, and I'll cover your housing for 6 months." My throat tightened. I don't know what to say. "Say yes," he said simply. And then, finally, I let the tears come. Not because I was sad, because for the first time in a long time, something broke open in me. The part that had been bracing for impact, waiting for the other shoe to drop, always preparing for disappointment. That part softened. I nodded and he smiled. "Welcome home." He gave me a tour of the rest of the building after that. There was a kitchen in the back, still being renovated. A sunroom that would become a reading lounge, offices that would house volunteers, staff, coordinators. He explained everything with a quiet, passionate certainty, like he'd been dreaming. Yet for years, and now, finally, he'd found someone to hand the dream to. Me. We walked outside again around noon. The bakery's scent was still in the air, sweeter now, brighter. The town had come to life, kids on bikes, dogs barking, a couple of older women chatting on a bench. "I didn't think people like you were real," I said quietly. He looked at me, brow raised. "People like me." I gestured at the building, the key in my hand, the folder pressed to my chest. "People who give second chances." His voice softened. "Maybe you just hadn't been in the right place yet." And then he said something I'd never forget. "We all get a moment in life, just one, where we're asked to become something bigger than we ever imagined. Most people walk past it. You didn't." The sun was warm on my skin. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt steady. I didn't know what tomorrow held, but for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. The room they gave me above the center was small, just a bed, a dresser, a little bathroom with a window that faced the trees. But to me, it felt like a castle. I ran my fingers along the windowsill, still dusty from construction, and sat on the edge of the mattress like I might fall through it. It was the first bed I'd had that didn't come with someone else's history. I set my bag down and just stared at the walls for a long while. Silence wasn't something I was used to, not the safe kind. I kept waiting for shouting neighbors, for car alarms or sirens, or someone pounding on the wall like back in my old place. But all I heard was the wind through the trees and the sound of children laughing somewhere down the block. That night, I didn't cry. I just breathed. The next morning I started helping. We weren't open to the public yet, but there was so much to be done. I organized boxes of donated books, cleaned out cabinets, labeled supplies. Each task felt like more than it was, like I wasn't just preparing a space, I was preparing a version of myself that hadn't existed before. He didn't hover. The man, Eli, he finally introduced himself, checked in once or twice, but mostly let me move at my own pace. He trusted me. That was new and terrifying. The second week, I met some of the others, volunteers mostly. A retired teacher named Francis who baked banana bread every Sunday and called me kiddo. A college student named Mateo who helped with the website and talked a mile a minute about renewable energy and social justice. And Nora, quiet, steady Nora, who'd once been a client at another center like ours and now gave her time to keep the books balanced and the pantry full. They welcomed me like I'd always been there. It felt strange and dangerous to be wanted. One afternoon, as we sat on folding chairs in the half-finished community room, Francis passed me a paper cup of coffee and said, "You got a calm about you, the kind people follow." I nearly choked on my sip. "Me?" She nodded, not smiling, just sure. You're the kind that survives fire and walks out with water for the rest of us." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. By the end of the third week, I had a routine: morning coffee with the early volunteers, afternoon planning sessions with Eli, evenings alone in my room, the window cracked just enough to let in the sound of crickets. I wrote things down: dreams for the center, ideas for programs, lists of names we could call it. Every time I started writing, I ended up writing more than just work stuff. I wrote about the station, about my mother, about the $10. It was like something had been unlocked inside me, a voice I didn't know I had clearing its throat. And every time I felt the old fear creeping in, the voice that said, "This won't last. They'll realize you're a fraud. You don't belong here." I'd go downstairs and walk the halls of the center. Just touching the walls made something settle in me, like I was claiming the space with every step. On the 34th day, yes, I was counting, Eli asked me to come into the office. He was already sitting behind the desk, a folder in front of him. "Everything okay?" I asked, nerves rising. He nodded. "Better than okay." He pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a proposal. My name on the header: Director of Programs, Community Impact Division. "I want to make it official," he said. I stared down at it. There was a salary listed, benefits, a job description that made my chest swell with both pride and terror. "You sure?" I asked. "I mean, I've only been here a month." "Long enough to know you're the soul of this place." He said it so easily. I picked up the paper and traced the letters of my own name. It didn't look like mine. It looked like someone else's life, someone confident, qualified, whole. But deep down, I wanted it. I wanted all of it. So I said yes. And the moment I did, something shifted in me again. Not like a light switch, more like a door that had been sealed shut, finally creaking open. I was no longer surviving. I was living. We spent the next few weeks preparing for the soft launch. Word started spreading around town. Flyers went up, local businesses donated supplies. People started stopping by just to peek inside, to ask questions. And then one day, a man walked in off the street and said, "I heard you're the lady to and talk to if someone's got nowhere else to go." I didn't even hesitate. "Come in," I said, holding the door wide. His name was Russell. He'd lost his job 6 months back, had been living out of his truck, doing odd jobs. Just needed a hand, someone to help him build a new plan. We sat in the new conference room, him cradling a chipped mug of coffee, and I realized this was it. This was the moment Eli had seen before I ever did. I knew what to say to Russell. I knew how to sit in that silence, how to fill it just enough to let someone know they weren't invisible. And as I scribbled down some resources, places to call, ways we could help, I felt the gravity of it all settle into place. I was becoming something I'd never thought possible, someone people trusted. That night I walked back to my room, pulled the crumpled envelope from my drawer, the original one from the station. I'd kept it all this time. The words on the note still clear: "You look like hope." Back then I thought it was something he saw in me, but now I think maybe he was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. Maybe I was hope, for Russell, for this town, for the kid I used to be who dreamed of better things. I put the note back in the envelope and tucked it under my pillow. And for the first time in my life, I slept without a single nightmare. I woke before dawn that morning, not from noise or nightmares, but because something in me had changed. There was a pulse in the air, a kind of anticipation, like the hush before a storm, but not the destructive kind, the kind that brings rain to dry places. I threw on a hoodie, still half asleep, and padded barefoot down the stairs. The center was dark and quiet, the scent of fresh wood still lingering from the construction crews that had finished up just days ago. I stood in the main hall, arms crossed, and just listened. The building felt alive. Later that day, we opened our doors. Officially, we had no ribbon to cut, no press, no camera crews, just a sandwich board out front with hand-chalked letters. Welcome, come in, you're home. By noon, the place was buzzing. A single mom came in holding a toddler on one hip and a stack of eviction notices in her hand. An older man with weathered eyes asked if we had job listings. A teenager came in pretending to be there for a snack, but lingered near the flyers for LGBTQ support groups. And we were ready. We didn't have everything. But we had coffee, sandwiches, a computer room, a lending library, and a few people who gave a damn. That was enough to start. Eli kept to the background most of the day. He helped carry in food donations and fixed a jammed copier. But mostly he watched, observed. The same way he had back at the train station. Quiet, intentional. Around mid-afternoon, I caught him watching me. I was sitting with a woman named Tasha, whose eyes were red from crying, but who kept saying, "I'm fine," over and over like a mantra. I just handed her a care kit and a card with free counseling info when our eyes met. He didn't smile, he just nodded, like he'd known all along I'd land right here, in the thick of it. By closing time, I was exhausted. My feet ached. My voice was hoarse, but my heart felt full. Frances was wiping down the counter, humming under her breath. Matteo sat cross-legged on the floor, reorganizing the art supplies someone had dumped out. Nora was running inventory on donated toiletries. I sat back against the wall, arms wrapped around my knees. "This is what it's supposed to feel like," I murmured, and I believed it. A few days later, I was walking back from the bakery with a bag of scones for the staff when I saw her. The woman from the station, the one I'd borrowed the $10 from. She was walking toward the cafe across the street, her hair up in a scarf, her coat flapping open in the spring wind. And I froze. She hadn't seen me. I stood there on the sidewalk, the bag warm in my hands, heart hammering. For a second, I thought about calling out, running across the road, telling her everything, but I didn't. Not yet. Something inside me said, "Wait." So I did. Instead, I watched as she held the cafe door open for someone, smiled and disappeared inside. Back at the center, I tucked the memory away like a note in my pocket, a thread, pulling me towards something unfinished. A week later, something unexpected happened. Eli called a team meeting. The sun was barely up. We sat in the conference room, sipping too hot tea, while he cleared his throat and laid a manila folder on the table. "I need to step back for a while," he said simply. The air shifted. "What do you mean, step back?" I asked. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "I've been offered an opportunity overseas, something I committed to a long time ago. It's time, but this place is ready. You're ready." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. "Who's going to run things?" Matteo asked. Eli looked directly at me. "I'm recommending Miri take full leadership. Permanent. Director." My mouth went dry. "You can't be serious," he smiled. "I've never been more serious." Nora reached over and squeezed my hand. Frances gave a little nod, like she'd already known. I didn't speak for a while. I just stared at the folder on the table. He believed in me. All of them did. And maybe I was starting to believe too. That night, I sat in my room and pulled the envelope out again, the original one, from the station. I unfolded the note for the 100th time. "You looked like hope." This time, I finally understood. He hadn't just meant I looked like someone with hope. He meant I was hope. For him, for me, for all of us. I pressed the paper flat against the desk, smoothed the creases and framed it. The next morning, I hung it on the wall of my office, front and center. People asked about it all the time, and I'd just smile and say, "It's a reminder." But I never told them the full story, not yet, because something told me it wasn't over. Not until I found her again, the woman at the station, the woman whose kindness had lit the fuse. Spring melted into summer, and the center bloomed like a garden left wild too long. The walls filled with paintings from local artists, kids, drawings tacked up beside thank you notes. The once quiet rooms now echoed with laughter, hushed tears, the soft clack of keyboards and the scrape of chairs as people came and went, each carrying their own story, each finding a corner of belonging. Here, we weren't perfect. We ran out of shampoo sometimes. The printer broke more often than it worked. Some days someone would show up angry, high, desperate, and we'd have to take a deep breath and lead with grace. But through it all, we showed up. I lived in that rhythm. Morning coffee, office hours, program meetings, emergency drop-ins. A little girl once came in crying because her school shoes had holes, and the other kids made fun of her. An hour later, she left grinning, brand new sneakers on her feet and a pink ribbon in her hair, courtesy of Francis. That was what we did. Quiet miracles. But even as the days filled with good work, part of me stayed stuck on the sidewalk outside that cafe. The woman from the train station haunted the edges of my thoughts. I didn't know her name, didn't know where she lived. All I had was her face and the memory of her eyes when she handed me that last $10 bill. It was ridiculous to hope I might find her again, but I did. One night, after a volunteer appreciation dinner, I found myself walking alone through the neighborhood. The night was warm, cicadas buzzing in the trees. My heels clicked against the pavement, echoing through the quiet street. I turned a corner near the cafe and paused. There she was, sitting at a small outdoor table, hands wrapped around a mug of something warm even in the heat. She was alone, reading a book under the soft gold glow of a string of patio lights. And before I could talk myself out of it, I crossed the street. "Excuse me," I said, voice tight. She looked up, same eyes, same calm. Her face changed as she recognized me, confused at first, then cautious. "I don't know if you remember me," I said. "A while ago, at the train station. I was sitting on the bench with a busted phone and a one-way ticket to nowhere." She blinked, then her mouth opened slightly. "You," she said slowly, "you asked for $10. "I did," I nodded. "And you gave it." She set her mug down. "I always wondered what happened to you." I pulled out the envelope, the original one, creased and stained, the ink a little faded now. I kept it in my bag always, like a talisman. I laid it gently on the table in front of her. She opened it slowly, as if afraid it might crumble. Tears filled her eyes as she read the words she'd written all that time ago. "You kept it," she whispered. "I did," I said, voice breaking. "That $10 saved my life, literally, but it wasn't just the money. It was the fact that someone saw me. Someone believed I was worth betting on." She pressed her fingers to her lips. "Can I buy you dinner?" I asked. She laughed through her tears. "I think I owe you a whole meal." We talked for 3 hours. Her name was Celeste. She was a retired nurse. She'd just lost her sister the month before. We met at the station. Said she was raw that day, open in a way she usually wasn't. "When I saw you sitting there," she said, "I just had this feeling, like if I looked away, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." I told her everything about Eli. The center, the people, the folder on the desk with my name in bold letters, the framed note on my office wall. She listened with hands folded, eyes never leaving mine. "You made it," she whispered. I shook my head, smiling. "I'm still making it, but I'm not where you found me. Not anymore." As we stood to leave, she touched my arm. "Thank you," she said. I laughed gently. "I should be thanking you." "No," she said, firmer now. "You don't understand. I needed to believe that kindness mattered, that it did something. You proved that. For people like me, that's everything. We exchanged numbers. I didn't know what I expected. After that night, maybe a text now and then, a holiday card, a warm hello if we passed on the street. But Celeste came to the center 2 weeks later with 3 boxes of donated books and a tray of lemon bars. "I don't bake," she said, "but I figured, why not try?" The lemon bars were terrible, but she kept showing up. And the 3rd time, she came. She brought a photo of her sister and pinned it to the memorial wall in the main hall, right next to a photo of my mother. People noticed. They began bringing photos too. It became something sacred. We called it the Wall of Echoes, a place where memories spoke, where we honored the ones who shaped us, lost or living. One evening, after everyone had gone home and the lights had dimmed, I stood in front of the wall, fingers grazing the frames. Beside me, Celeste whispered, "Do you ever think that some people meet just once, and that moment changes everything?" I nodded slowly. "All the time." She looked at me. "I'm proud of you, Miri." I smiled, swallowing the ache in my throat. "I'm proud of us." The center wasn't just mine now. It belonged to everyone who walked through its doors. And it started, not with a government grant or a mission statement, but with a stranger at a train station and a $10 bill. That truth settled in me like roots, deep, unshakable. Sometimes we don't notice the moment a tide turns. We only realize it when we look back and see the shores a mile behind us. That's how it felt, standing in my office late one Wednesday, watching the soft chaos of the center in motion. A teenager was laughing down the hall, his voice echoing in that big, echo-prone room. Nora was hosting a financial literacy workshop in the multi-purpose room, whiteboard full of scrawled numbers. And Celeste, now practically part of the staff, was coaching a woman through a job application, her hand resting gently on her back, like a lighthouse beam. I leaned against the doorway, just watching. This used to be a dream I was afraid to say out loud. Now, it was my Tuesday, my Wednesday, my life. But that week, something stirred the water again. It started with an envelope again, but this time it was addressed to me with no return name, just a gold-foiled stamp in the corner, Marigold Foundation. I almost tossed it, thinking it was a fundraiser packet. But something made me open it. Inside was a single card. "You helped build what we only ever talked about. Let us help you grow it. Coffee? E." My hands went cold. Eli. I hadn't heard from him in 2 months, not since the quiet goodbye he gave, a squeeze of my shoulder and a promise to write that never came. I stared at the card for a long time before turning it over. A cafe name, a time. That Friday, I went. The cafe was high-end, tucked between a florist and a wine shop. As soon as I stepped in, I spotted him. Same gentle posture, but dressed sharper, eyes brighter. He stood, smiling, and I walked over slowly, like approaching an old photograph that suddenly came to life. "Miri," he said warmly, "you came." "You asked," I replied, breath shaky. We sat. There were no niceties, no "how've you been?" Just a straight dive into the deep end. "I wasn't lying," he said, "when I said you were ready, but there's more coming, more than just what we built back home." He slid a binder across the table. Inside were blueprints, grant approvals, photos of vacant buildings in different cities, and something else, a name, the Lighthouse Project. He smiled, watching me take it in. "I want to replicate what you built. Centers like yours, all over. We've got the funding. What we don't have is you." I looked up. "You want me to leave?" He shook his head. "No. I want you to lead. From wherever you want. Grow the roots wider." I didn't answer right away. The idea of expansion thrilled me, but it also terrified me. This place, this city, this center had become my heartbeat. Could I stretch beyond it without tearing something vital? Back at the center, I pulled Matteo and Francis aside, showed them the binder, watched their eyes grow wide. Francis was the first to speak. "You're not going alone, right?" "No," I said, "not unless you're coming with me." She grinned. "Then let's buy bigger shoes." We called a meeting. I laid it out for the team. The binder sat in the middle of the table like a spark, and one by one people leaned forward, lit by it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were ready to multiply. The weeks that followed were dizzying. Zoom calls, walkthroughs, legal documents, press kits, architects. But for all the noise, the heart stayed the same. We were building spaces where people mattered. Places that said you belong without needing a password or proof of worth. Celeste cried when I told her. "Because it means it wasn't a fluke," she said, wiping her eyes. "It means this is real, this is lasting." And it was. We chose 2 new cities for the next centers, different in size and need, but both full of overlooked people and empty buildings with promise. Francis agreed to relocate and run the second site. Matteo would stay on and train new team leads. I floated between both worlds, present but pulled, steady but always chasing time. And it was during that season of flight, suitcases and spreadsheets, and cross-country red-eyes that I got the call. It was Nora. Her voice was low, fractured. "It's Celeste," she said. She collapsed during the morning shift. My world tilted. I flew back immediately. By the time I reached the hospital, she was already in ICU. Stroke, they said, sudden, severe. I stood outside her room, palm flat to the glass. She was pale, small. Her hands lay still on the blanket, the same hands that once held a mug outside. That cafe that once passed me $10 with no strings. The doctors said it didn't look good. I sat with her anyway. For hours. I read aloud from her favorite book of poetry. I told her how the new centers were coming along. I promised her we'd name one of the libraries after her. When I finally left that night, I was cracked wide open. The center was quieter the next day. Someone had lit a candle in the entryway, and notes began appearing, pinned to the wall of echoes beside Celeste's photo. Notes that read, "Thank you for seeing me. You gave me my first second chance. You were my lighthouse." The next evening, Celeste passed, peacefully, quietly. I felt it the moment it happened, like a lantern going out in one room and relighting in another. We held a gathering that weekend, not a funeral, not quite. Just a community of people who owed a piece of their healing to a woman who gave quietly and loved loudly. I spoke last. I held up that old envelope, her $10 bill long gone, but the note still crisp inside the frame. She didn't know that day, I said, voice trembling. She didn't know she was lighting a match that would become a fire, but she did it anyway. And that's the legacy. Not the size of the gesture, but the belief behind it. That night, someone slipped a $10 bill into the donation box. No name. Just a sticky note that read, "Pass it on." I smiled. We would. Time had a way of reshaping things. It felt like it was only yesterday that I had sat in my small office, alone, wondering if the dream of opening a place like this was even possible. Yet here I was, standing at the front of a new building in a city I never thought I'd find myself in, watching as workers finished the final touches on the second of what would be many centers. The glass doors shimmered in the late afternoon, sun casting a reflection of all that had been built, not just in bricks and mortar, but in people. I was halfway through a meeting when I felt it, a ripple, a shift, something unspoken. Francis, Matteo, and I had been hammering out the logistics for the opening, everything from hiring staff to inventorying supplies. But just as Francis was confirming the details with the local vendors, I glanced out the window. There, across the street, I saw her. The woman from the station. Celeste's face flashed before me. how much of her still lived in me. And I knew it was her. I excused myself from the meeting, my heart pounding as I hurried toward the exit. I couldn't quite explain why, but I had to speak to her, now. As I crossed the street, I watched her step out of the local bakery, a paper bag clutched in her hands, her movements so fluid, so familiar. I was close enough now to hear the wind, catch the edges of her coat, just like it had years ago. She turned, startled when she saw me, but then recognition blossomed across her face, quickly followed by a smile. "Miri?" Her voice still warm, still real. I nodded, my throat tight. "It's you. I thought I'd never see you again." She took a step closer, laughing lightly. "Seems like we have a way of finding each other, huh?" We stood there for a moment, the busy street fading around us as the world seemed to pause. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I live here now," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice, as though the answer should have been obvious. "I've been here a few months now, just trying to start over, you know." I nodded, unsure of how to react. Celeste had been such a vital part of the beginning of everything. Even though she was physically far from us now, her presence still lingered like a guiding light, and yet here she was, an echo that never quite left. "I'm opening another center," I said, breathless. "It's not just in one place anymore. It's growing, expanding." Her eyes widened, but then she smiled. I knew it. I always knew this was bigger than what you had, bigger than what I had to give. But this place, I stopped myself. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I felt, how everything, all of it, felt like it began the moment I met. Or how I had never stopped thinking about that last $10 bill. Her eyes softened. "Miri, what you did with that money was more than anything I could have ever expected. It wasn't about the $10. It was the moment you took that leap of faith. That was where it all began." I blinked, taking in her words. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small, weathered envelope, identical to the one I had kept all these years. She handed it to me, the same delicate handwriting on the outside. "Sometimes," she said softly, "we're meant to pass on what we can, no matter how small, but there are other times when we realize we've been given everything we need. All we have to do is decide to use it." I opened the envelope, but instead of a $10 bill, there was a card, one that seemed almost familiar in its simplicity. Just 2 words, written with the same ink I had seen all those years ago: "Pass it on." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of those words wash over me. "We've both been part of something bigger than us," I whispered. She smiled, her eyes gleaming with something deeper. "Yes, and when you're ready, you'll keep passing it on, in ways you can't even imagine yet." Before I could say another word, she turned, walking toward a bench by the sidewalk, sitting down with the same stillness I remembered from that first meeting. As I stood there for a moment, watching her, something shifted inside me. Celeste wasn't just a figure of the past anymore. She was part of the foundation, the quiet, constant heartbeat that reminded me of what mattered. She wasn't just a stranger who gave me $10. She was the one who had given me permission to believe in what I was capable of, to keep moving even when the world seemed against me. I looked down at the card in my hand and felt a deep sense of peace. It was time. I tucked the card into my pocket and turned back toward the building. There was a new center to open, a new chapter to write, but I wouldn't be writing it alone. I never had been. The days after meeting Celeste again felt like everything had been realigned, like the universe itself had shifted on its axis. The center in the new city was moving forward, the walls echoing with the same joy I remembered from the original space. But as I navigated through the tasks, team meetings, checking in on progress, running through logistics, I couldn't shake the thought of her, of us. She had asked me if I was ready to take the next step, and that question lingered like an unanswered prayer. I kept thinking about the conversations we used to have, about belief, about possibilities, about what's next. I wanted to believe I could lead this, stretch it across miles, across states, even countries. But what if the story I was writing wasn't meant to be spread too thin? What if I was destined to lead only in this one place, this one community? What if I wasn't ready to carry the weight of something this big? It wasn't until Frances grabbed my arm one evening that I realized I wasn't in this alone. "Stop," she said, her voice sharp with affection. "You're trying to carry too much on your own. You know we're all in this with you, right?" I looked at her, blinking away the haze in my thoughts. She was right. The burden I had been carrying wasn't mine to shoulder alone. Not anymore. And it hadn't been for a long time. We were a team. The next morning, I spent time walking through the new building, hands in my pockets, thinking about how to take the next step. I had never imagined any of this, the reach, the breadth, the possibility. The weight had been heavy at first, and there were times I doubted I could handle it all. But I felt it now, the gravity of it. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. About the team who had fought, bled, and sweated alongside me. About the people who had come and gone through these doors. About the strangers who would one day find us in cities we had never even imagined reaching. And of course, there was still Eli. I hadn't heard from him since that meeting at the cafe. I hadn't responded to his offer of help with the new expansion, not because I wasn't grateful, but because something in me had shifted. The dream was mine, ours. It was no longer something I was willing to delegate or trust to anyone else. I could see the finish line ahead, but it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the fame or recognition. It was about making something real, something lasting. But then, unexpectedly, I got another call from Eli. The voice on the other end was calm, but I could tell there was something different in it. He was urgent. "I need to see you again," he said. I felt a tightening in my chest. What was it now? When I met him again, it was in a small, quiet corner of the city. Not the polished cafe or the high-rise buildings, but a street corner. A place we used to walk by when we were first getting things off the ground. We both stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. The world was buzzing around us, but in that small pocket of time, it was just the two of us, again. "I think I might have been wrong," Eli said softly. "Wrong about what?" I asked, crossing my arms, unsure where this was headed. "About everything," he replied. "About thinking that what you needed was money or resources. I thought you were building something because you needed help, because you couldn't do it on your own." I blinked, confused. What are you talking about?" "I thought we were here to make this bigger," he continued, looking away. "Briefly. But I realized I've been looking at this the wrong way. I wanted to be the savior. I wanted to step in and fix everything. But I don't think you need fixing. I think you've already figured it out. You've already built it. I've been a part of the equation. But what I realized is that you don't need any more help from me." I wasn't sure what to say. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, my chest tight. He took a deep breath. "I'm stepping away, Miri. You don't need me anymore." And then, just like that, it hit me. The full weight of everything we had built, of everything we had become, and the realization that I had been standing on the edge of something so much bigger than myself. I'd been afraid of the responsibility, afraid of what would happen if I failed. But now, standing there in that quiet corner of the city, I realized something else. That I had already passed every test, every moment of doubt, every obstacle. I wasn't alone. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. I reached out and clasped his hand in mine. "Thank you," I said. "You've already helped. You've given me more than you know." And with that, he smiled, his face softening. "I'm proud of you." For a long time, neither of us said anything more. We just stood there, in the quiet. But when we finally walked away, I felt a sense of finality, of peace. The center would keep growing, and so would we. The next morning, I called Francis and Matteo into my office. I had news, big news. "We're not stopping here," I said, looking them both in the eye. "We're taking this even further. We're going global." They looked at me for a long moment, then smiled wide. "Let's do it," Francis said, her voice brimming with certainty. I grinned, my heart full. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about Eli or anyone else. This was about all of us, about the people who'd been lifted, about the future we were building together. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was real. In the weeks that followed, the momentum of what we were building spread like wildfire. People responded in ways I never expected. There were the letters from strangers, the social media messages that filled the inbox, and the calls from organizations asking how they could be part of the movement. We had only just begun the process of scaling, and already doors were opening everywhere. It wasn't just about physical locations anymore. It was about establishing a network, a community that would stretch across continents. The vision I had once kept quietly in my mind had taken shape and was growing beyond my control, and that was exactly what I had wanted all along. But I wasn't ready for what came next. The first hint of a challenge arrived when we hit the road to visit potential sites in Europe. I traveled with Francis and Matteo, the three of us discussing strategy, financial projections, and how to adapt our model to different cultural contexts. It felt surreal. Too much had happened so quickly, and every new place we visited was a reminder of just how much the world had expanded for us. Still, as we moved through airports, meeting with city officials, and gathering local support, I felt something shifting in me. Something wasn't right. There was a subtle pressure building, one that wasn't connected to the external world, but to something within. The excitement and pride I felt at the project's success were tempered by a growing sense of doubt. What if it was all too much? What if we were growing too fast? I voiced my fears to Francis one evening, sitting in a hotel lobby in Paris, the faint hum of traffic just outside. She listened quietly, her fingers gently tapping her mug. "Miri, it's okay to feel overwhelmed," she said softly. "I know, it's a lot, but you're doing this because you believe in it. You've always believed in it." "I do," I replied, my voice uncertain. "But what if I'm the one holding it all back? What if I can't keep up? What if—" "Miri," Francis interrupted gently, her eyes locking with mine. "You've already done it. You've built something that didn't exist before. This is bigger than you think, and if it grows bigger than you can manage, that's a good thing. It means you've passed the torch. You've created a foundation that others can lead with." I felt her words sink into me, a weight lifting from my shoulders. It was true, this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the team, about the people who had walked with me every step of the way, and the thousands of others who had yet to walk through our doors. Later that night, as I stood outside, looking up at the twinkling lights of the Paris skyline, I felt the answer to my question emerge in the quiet. This was what we had been building toward. This was the dream I'd never dared to fully embrace, and it was bigger than I had ever imagined. But it was also a reminder that I wasn't alone. We were all in this together. The next day, we met with local leaders who had already seen the impact of our centers in their own communities. The conversations were easy, fueled by shared excitement and the knowledge that this was the beginning of something truly transformative. By the time we boarded our flight back to the States, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. We were on the right path, but the next unexpected moment came when I returned to the office. Eli had left a message for me. After months of silence, he wanted to talk again. There was a part of me that had wondered if he would reappear, if the past would catch up with us somehow. And as much as I'd moved on, as much as I had embraced the idea of leading on my own, a small part of me still wondered what might have been if I had taken his offer, but this time I knew something had changed. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I called him back. We met at the same cafe where everything had begun. This time the conversation was different. We spoke about the work we had done, the successes, the challenges. There were no grand gestures or offers of funding. There were no promises, just two people acknowledging that our paths had diverged, but that the connection between us, however complicated, had brought us to this moment. "I'm proud of what you've built," Eli said, his voice steady. I nodded, grateful for his acknowledgement, but I also realized something important. I didn't need his validation to know that we were doing the right thing. The center was already more than it ever could have been, with just one person's vision. It had become a living, breathing entity, a force that was stronger because of the people who had come together to support it. We said our goodbyes without the weight of unspoken words, a final chapter closing between us. Eli was a part of the story, but the story was no longer his to write. Back at the center, I found myself surrounded by the familiar faces that had been with me through every challenge and triumph. Francis, Matteo, Celeste, and the team, they were there, present in ways that mattered. They were not just employees or colleagues. They were my family, my community. The feeling of family was something that had always been a driving force behind everything I did. This wasn't just a center, it was a sanctuary, a home for people who had nowhere else to go. And I was no longer afraid of what it would take to grow it. I knew now that growth wasn't just about building bigger spaces. It was about opening more doors, about welcoming more people, about creating more of those precious moments when a person who was once lost could finally feel found. That night, as I walked through the doors of the center, I smiled at the little touches we had added along the way. Photos of the first volunteers, quotes from those who had found a second chance, and one hand-painted sign that simply read, "Welcome home." We were ready. We were no longer just building a center. We were building a movement. The weeks passed in a blur of activity, excitement, and a growing sense of inevitability. Our movement, our center, was now more than just an idea. It was a living force, resonating with so many people, touching lives in ways I hadn't imagined possible. We had begun working with other organizations, partnering with schools, shelters, and healthcare facilities to expand our reach. Every step forward felt like a small victory, a reminder of the $10 bill, of Celeste's faith in me, and of the endless possibilities I had once been too afraid to grasp. But with that rapid growth came new challenges. They didn't come in the form of finances or resources. Those were in hand, thanks to a growing network of supporters who had been moved by what we were doing. No, the challenges were more internal. It was the constant pull between staying grounded and allowing this dream to soar higher than I ever thought possible. The first cracks appeared when I received a call from a high-profile investor, a representative from one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the world, wanted to meet with me. They had heard about our work, and they believed in what we were building. The offer, a significant sum of money, enough to scale the centers into new countries, new continents. At first, I thought it was too good to be true. It was everything. We needed to push forward. But as the days went on, a strange discomfort settled in. The offer was tempting, no doubt. But was this the path I wanted to take? Was money the answer? I sat down that evening, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on my chest. I thought about how far we had come without relying on any one person or entity. The grassroots nature of it all, the support from the community, the volunteers, the local donations, had been what made our centers different. This was never supposed to be about big corporate funding or bowing to the wishes of high-powered investors. But at the same time, we couldn't ignore the impact their resources could have. It was a paradox. I picked up the phone and called Frances. "Miri, take a breath," she said, hearing the uncertainty in my voice. "This is exactly what you've been preparing for. You've always known the decision would come. What are you afraid of?" "I don't want to lose control," I admitted. "I don't want to lose the essence of what we've built. It's about the people, not the money. It's always been about the people." She was silent for a moment. Then, softly, she replied, "Then don't lose sight of that. Money doesn't have to change what we do. It just gives us more of a chance to do it. More resources, more space, more help. But it doesn't change our mission. It can't." I let her words sink in. She was right, of course. Money wasn't the enemy. It was how it was used that mattered. If this was a chance to reach more people, to provide more of what we had to give, to truly change the world. Maybe I was just afraid of the power we were about to wield. The kind of power that came with responsibility. The kind of power that was, in a sense, the final step in creating something that could never go backward. I called the investor back. The next day, my heart still pounding in my chest. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The agreement was signed soon after, and I felt the whirlwind of excitement and anticipation all over again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just about building something in a few cities or regions. This was about building something that could change the world, a network that could reach people no matter where they were, no matter their circumstances. The plan wasn't just about expansion, it was about integration, seamless systems, adaptable to any environment, no matter how different or challenging. But no matter how far we reached, I knew the heart of it would always be the same. The people. The ones who had believed when no one else did. The ones who had taken the leap, who had shared their stories, who had walked into a center seeking help and found more than just support. They had found a family. A few months later, we opened our first international center. It was a celebration like no other. The entire team was there, along with representatives from our new partners and the local community. We stood together, surrounded by new faces, each one filled with hope and gratitude, ready to begin their own journey. As I spoke to the crowd that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. We had done it, and I realized in that moment that this wasn't just a success for me, for Frances, or for Matteo. It was a success for everyone who had ever taken that first step of faith. For Celeste, for all the people who had entrusted us with their stories, and for the strangers who would one day walk through our doors, not knowing that their lives were about to change. Later that night, after the event had wrapped up, I stood alone outside, looking out at the city. The lights flickered in the distance, and I couldn't help but think of how far we had come. I took a deep breath, remembering that moment on the train platform when I had first met Celeste. The way her kindness had changed everything, the way she had believed in me when I hadn't believed in myself. I knew deep down that she had been right. Everything had led to this, and in the quiet, I promised myself I would continue to pass it on, to keep giving, to keep believing, and to never lose sight of the people who had made this possible. We weren't done yet, not by a long shot. The months after our international launch were a whirlwind. Each new center we opened felt like another dream realized. And with every ribbon-cutting ceremony came new challenges, new lessons learned, and even more people whose lives were touched by the work we were doing. The team expanded. More hands joined us, and the vision grew clearer. We were no longer just offering help in one community. We were planting seeds in places we had never imagined. I was traveling more than ever before, meeting with local partners, engaging with the community, and overseeing every step of the expansion. Despite the exhaustion, there was something exhilarating about the pace. I had finally embraced the notion that we were no longer a small local organization. We were a movement that had the potential to change the world. But as we grew, so did the pressure. As the centers spread, I began to feel like a small part of something much larger, like I was slowly losing touch with the essence of why we started. There were days when the scale of it all felt overwhelming, when I felt disconnected from the people whose lives had been transformed by our work. I had become so focused on the logistics and the grand picture that I had forgotten to check in with the hearts and souls of the community we were building. The quiet moments, the ones that had inspired us in the beginning, were becoming rarer. It was on one of those long days of meetings, traveling, and endless checklists that I found myself in a small cafe in New York, waiting for a partner to arrive. I was alone, my mind racing with thoughts of budgets, projections, and what we still needed to do. But as I sat there staring out the window at the busy streets, something familiar caught my eye. An older woman sitting at a table by the window, smiling at nothing in particular. She looked serene, at peace, and as I watched her, a flood of memories rushed through me. I thought of Celeste, of the kindness she had shown me when I was unsure of everything, of the belief she had in me when I didn't even have belief in myself. I thought of how her gesture had opened a door I never thought I would walk through. The woman in the cafe was like Celeste in so many ways, calm, graceful, and grounded. I couldn't help but smile, and it was in that moment that the weight of everything, the expansion, the teams, the pressure, seemed to lift. It was as if the universe was reminding me why I had started this journey, because it wasn't about the scale, the money, or even the recognition. It was about the impact on people's lives, the way a single act of kindness could change everything. Just then, I got a text from Frances. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." Her words echoed in my mind, and for the first time in a while, I realized how much I needed to reconnect with what had made this journey meaningful in the first place. I was getting lost in the day-to-day grind, in the numbers and the logistics. It was easy to forget what it was really all about, the people. I called her right away, and as soon as she picked up, I didn't even try to hide it. "I don't know if I can keep going like this," I said, my voice strained. "Everything's moving so fast. It's like I'm just floating above it all." "Slow down," she said gently. "You've come so far. You've built something beautiful, but you can't forget the heart of it. Remember why you started. Don't lose sight of the people who need you, the people you're helping. That's what it's all about." I sighed, feeling the weight of her words sink in. She was right. It wasn't the speed of our growth that mattered. It was the lives we were touching, the moments we were creating. The people we were helping needed to feel seen, heard, and loved, and I needed to be present for that. I spent the next few days revisiting the centers. I didn't do anything extraordinary. There were no major meetings or speeches, no new partnerships to sign. I simply spent time with the team and the people we were helping. I walked through the doors, sat with them, listened to their stories. I reminded myself why I was here in the first place. It wasn't for the accolades, the recognition, or the growth. It was for them. One afternoon, I found myself back at the first center we had ever opened, the one that had started it all. It looked different now, of course, but it still had that same feeling. The familiar warmth, the comforting buzz of activity, the sense of belonging. I sat in one of the chairs in the lobby and simply watched, allowing myself to be still for the first time in months. A mother walked in with her daughter and I smiled at them. They looked at me, unsure at first, but then they smiled back, and in that moment I realized something profound. This was bigger than any one person, bigger than me. It was a movement fueled by people who cared, by a community that supported one another, and by the belief that we could do something good in the world. And it was sustainable because of that connection, because of the shared purpose we all carried. I'd been so focused on growth that I had lost sight of the importance of presence. Growth without connection was empty. And what I realized now was that connection could never be lost. We had built something real, and as long as I stayed grounded in the why of it all, we would continue to grow in the right direction. Since the days after that moment were filled with a renewed sense of clarity. I adjusted my focus, spending more time in the communities we served, not just overseeing the mechanics of the operation. I kept reminding myself that it was never about how big we got. It was about staying true to the heart of the movement. And so, we kept going, moving forward with the belief that we could still make a difference, no matter how big or small. Because that's all that mattered in the end, the difference we were making in people's lives. It wasn't just about the centers, it was about the relationships, the connections, the stories that would continue long after the doors closed. Each day, it was a quiet, unremarkable afternoon when I got the message. Just a simple envelope, delivered by hand to the main office. No return address. Inside, tucked between two thick pieces of ivory cardstock, was a single sheet of paper and a note in familiar handwriting. My breath caught the moment I saw it. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years, but it was unmistakable, looped, graceful, a little slanted to the right. Dear Miri, if you're reading this, then fate has done what it always does, woven something just out of sight until the time was right for it to be seen. I wasn't sure if I'd ever get to send this, but I hoped. You probably don't remember me. Train station, $10. But I've never forgotten you. I froze. Celeste. I watched you walk away that day with more strength than I think you knew you had. I told myself not to expect anything to come of it, but I hoped. Oh, how I hoped. Over the years I've kept quiet, never reached out. I didn't want to interrupt your becoming. I just wanted to be one of the silent witnesses to your rise, like a gardener watching a wild seed bloom in secret. My chest tightened. I kept reading. You've created something beautiful, something necessary. I've read the articles, seen the broadcasts, watched the interviews, but I've never needed your attention. That's not why I gave you the $10. I gave it to you because I saw a light in you, a light you were doing your best to bury. There was a pause in the text, then the next line. Miri, I was never just passing through that day. I blinked. My heart pounded. That platform was part of a ritual I had done many times before, looking for someone who needed a push. I'd given that same $10 bill to two others before you. One vanished. The other returned it in the mail years later, along with a note about a bakery she'd opened. You were the third, but you were different. You didn't just use the money. You built something the world needed. My hands trembled as I turned the page over. I'm nearing the end of my road now, and I'm writing this from a place of peace. What I hoped for. What I dreamed might happen when I placed that bill in your hand. It came true. You reminded me why kindness still matters, why risking hope is never a waste. You turned $10 into something priceless. So, thank you, not just for proving me right, but for proving something to the world, that one moment can echo through eternity. There was no signature, just a final sentence written in delicate script. Love is never wasted, and faith, well, that's just love with its sleeves rolled up. I sat there in silence, tears on my cheeks. The world moved outside the window, but inside me, everything had stopped. All the years, the wait, the struggle, the victories, it all led back to that platform, to her, to the simplest act of kindness I had ever known, and to the realization that I had been walking alongside her spirit every step of the way, even without knowing it. I pressed the letter to my chest, held it there, and let the memory wrap around me like a blanket. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went back to the station. The same one, same time of day. The air was cool. The platform, just as worn as I remembered. I stood near the edge, letting the rumble of the train fill my chest like it once had. But I wasn't running this time. I watched people rush past, saw the same tired eyes, the same hurried glances at phones and watches. And then I saw her, not Celeste, not literally, but a young woman sitting alone on a bench, shoulders hunched, face pale, hands gripping a frayed strap on a worn-out bag. She looked so much like me all those years ago. Without hesitation, I walked over and sat beside her. She glanced at me, startled, but I smiled gently. "You okay?" I asked. She hesitated, eyes glassy. Then she shook her head. Just once, I reached into my coat pocket. The bill was there, $10, crisp, folded exactly the way Celeste had folded it for me. I had started carrying one like that everywhere, just in case. I held it out. "Take this," I said. She looked at it, confused, then at me. "I don't need charity," she whispered. "This isn't charity," I said softly. "It's a reminder that you're not alone, and that the next step you take might just change everything." She stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why?" she asked. I smiled. "Because someone once did the same for me." The train pulled in, the doors opened. She took the bill, stood up slowly, and walked on board. She turned once before the doors closed, just for a moment, and gave me a look I knew I'd carry with me forever. It was the look of someone who might just believe again. I stayed there, watching the train disappear into the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle in me. A circle closed, a promise kept, a life touched by kindness now touching another. I turned to leave, the platform behind me and the world ahead, and as I stepped into the flow of the city once more, I knew that wherever I went, I'd carry Celeste with me. Always. You know, they say a single act of kindness can ripple across a lifetime, but what they don't always tell you is just how far that ripple can travel. A $10 bill, that's all it took. It wasn't the money, it was the message behind it. I see you, I believe in you. When Celeste handed that crumpled bill to a frightened girl on a train platform, she wasn't just giving her a way home. She was planting something that would grow and stretch across cities, hearts, and years. And here's the part that still gets me. She never asked for anything in return. No credit, no spotlight. She gave and let go. That's the purest kind of faith, isn't it? I think about her every time I pass a stranger who looks like they're carrying more than they're saying. I think about her when I see someone hesitating on the edge of a new beginning. And now, maybe you will too, because this story, my story, was never really just mine. It belongs to everyone who's ever needed someone to believe in them, and everyone who's ever chosen to believe in someone else. So the next time you have the chance, be someone's Celeste. Even if it's just a small gesture or a word of encouragement, you never know what it might become. Thanks for staying with me all the way through.